Thanks for all the confessions coming over the weekend. We've gone through them all. We hand out some rather fine smart speakers if we use yours. Philippa, we are using yours today. Mm-hmm. And don't forget, the podcast is available. A brand new podcast went up on Friday. To the faithful of the forgiveness groove, says Philippa. Way back in the glory days of big hair, Wilson Phillips and tapered jeans tucked inside socks, I was living my best life in a rural area of New England, about 3 hours north of New York City. My town was small, everyone knew everyone else, and no one locked their house or car doors. In fact, you would regularly see cars left idling outside while people ran into the apothecary or package store. Yes, it was the 90s, but in a small New England town, we did have apothecaries, which was like Boots with ice cream.
Okay.
And package stores where you buy liquor. So it was like an off-license, but we're calling it a package store.
Oh, right.
Now, when I say no one locked their doors, that is not entirely true. No locals did. Every Friday, we were regularly invaded by the weekenders, also known as New Yorkers. These city slickers would arrive in their posh cars and their fat wallets. They bought some of the most beautiful properties in our quaint town, including the large property at the end of our dead-end road. Our New York neighbours were actually a very sweet older couple. I was 10. They seemed incredibly old, but they might just have been in their 50s. I mean, imagine being that old. How embarrassing. Their house was a beautiful large property with a pool, 30 acres of land. To give an idea, that's the size of Dartmoor Zoological Park. And like a zoo, this property had a menagerie of animals, including a large pond, ducks, swans, snapping turtles, a park-like enclosure with donkeys, llamas and sheep, an aviary, peacocks and peahens, and a rabbit run. The couple did allow us to come up and see the animals whenever we wanted and encouraged us to fish in their pond. The donkeys were very friendly, the llamas spat regularly, the peacocks screamed like terrorized babies, whatever they sound like, and the white rabbit was quite shy and rather fat. But it was quite idyllic having all these animals just next door. Now, the majority of the 30 acres were woods. My brother and friends would regularly play in the woods. And in true friendly neighbour style, there were no fences or boundaries between properties, and all the kids on the dead-end road would regularly pass from one property to the next to access the woods, where we would play all day. This lack of fences and boundaries was also true for neighbourhood dogs. The Thursday night, our local neighbour, we'll call him Mr. B, came to our door with a package wrapped in a towel. He was visibly shaken and slowly unwrapped the edge of the towel to reveal the long, unmoving, no longer snow-white ears of the weekender's rabbit. The rabbit was encrusted with dirt, completely unmoving and definitely dead. Mr. B, I should have warned you, there's a dead animal.
Okay, is there a dead animal?
Yes, there is. Right, it's the rabbit. Mr. B asked us if we knew whose rabbit it was, as his dog, we'll call her Lassie, had brought it home that evening, it being another century and another continent, and the dog would almost certainly be dead. Yeah. The rabbit was disgusting, and this was so unlike Lassie. She had been a genial soul, and we had never known her hurt, let alone kill another animal. On close inspection, there were no puncture wounds or tears to the fur. My dad and Mr. B hatched a plan. Lassie had probably only scared the rabbit to death, we decided, and she just brought it back to the house as a trophy. Well, Dad and Mr. B set to work to clean up the rabbit. They washed off all the mud and caked all the dirt with warm water in the kitchen sink, and once the huge bunny was then reduced to a soaking bundle of white wet fur, I was sent to the bedroom to get a hairdryer. Once the rabbit was fully coiffed, primped and preened, large as life. Well, not life, still dead.
Very much not life.
But back in a huge-looking, it just looked like a huge snow-white sleeping rabbit now. And Dad and Mr. B crept back to the weekender's house, and the rabbit was safely placed back in the hutch with the look of being peacefully asleep. However, the following week, the caretaker, Bob, who fed and cared the animals, stopped by. He would regularly allow us to follow him around and ride the mower around the grounds. Lovely man. And it's for this part of the story that we need forgiveness, because when Bob arrived at the door, my brother and I were the only two people home. He asked for my parents, but when we explained that they were not home, he asked us if we'd seen the New Yorker's rabbit in the last week. We both shook our heads and tried to look as innocent as possible, and unknowing of the terrible demise of the once glutinous rabbit. Bob explained that the rabbit had died, which we knew, and that he had buried it the previous week, which we had not known. Imagine how hard it was for my brother and I to disguise our shock at this news. Lassie had not killed the rabbit, she just dug it up. Bob was so confused to find the pristine, beautifully fluffed rabbit back in the hatch. What's it doing there? How did it get to look like this? He'd already cleaned the hutch out to prepare for a new rabbit to be rehomed. So to the collective, I seek forgiveness, not from the weekenders, who, although they were very nice, were driving up property prices in the area, making it harder for locals to buy.
Wow.
Class war.
Yeah.
But from Bob, who was terribly confused by this pristine rabbit. From what I know, no one told the owners, as they knew the rabbit was dead in the first place. I also seek forgiveness from Lassie, who has been blamed for the entire thing and I'm sure had been left without treats for days. Thank you in advance for any forgiveness you can bestow. That'll be from Philippa. So thank you, Philippa. Very nice crossfade.
I thought so.
I couldn't tell where it finished and where it started. Shocking. Tell me everything is fine in the end, apart from the rabbit, but maybe the rabbit just died in a natural death.
Yeah, it was full of twists and turns, this story.
Yes.
It really was, and the plot twist at the end was really fantastic and rather compelling. However, I do think, Philippa, you probably should have just come clean to Bob and just said, like, look, this is what happened. I'm sure Bob would have been really understanding about it, because he was confused. He was confused, and he had to bury the rabbit again, and that would have been really annoying. And so for that reason, not forgiving, I'm afraid, although I know you were 10.
But it was an Easter mystery. How mystical. They could have contacted the local priest and said, hey, do you want this story? Because you can get a whole month's worth of
it has
sermons
come
out
to
there.
pass
Yes.
that there is the rabbit that I buried. So, yes, I'm going to forgive because obviously, as Holly's pointed out, the twist at the end, fabulous stuff. Bob had already buried the rabbit and there it is in the hutch. Why were you using a hairdryer? I didn't understand that bit.
To dry the fur.
But then the fur, we would look a bit weird. Also feels a little too much circle of life. Maybe the rabbit had been killed. So probably all of those things coming to pass.
But if you were dead, you'd like to be...
Would I want to be hair dried?
Primped and preened?
Well, yeah, why not? Yes.
Just basic undertaker work.
Welcome to my Thursdays. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
Okay. Do you forgive Philippa, though? That is the question. It's the people's verdict, please. 61054, first word is Simon. Forgiveness or no? People's verdict, here it comes.
Everyone's forgiving tonight. Tommy in Winchester. At the end of the day, no one got hurt apart from the rabbit, but that was already dead. A funny story, and I'm sure Bob got over it. Jerry says, utterly forgiven, hilarious. A resurrecting bunny. Most suitable confession for the trio of forgiveness. And finally, Tim from Sutton Coldfield says, of course forgiven. No fatal attraction here. We've gone from boiling a bunny to a bouffant bunny. No harm done. Hilarious.
Bouffant bunny, indeed, very good. And your confession, please, should you have one? Send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Is it too loud for you, Holly, by any chance?
A little bit loud, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thing is, Holly has to have her headphones at the same level that Matt does.
Yeah,
And Matt's
I
a
need 'em loud.
deaf metalhead. Yes. And Holly is a sensitive flower. Today's confession comes from Cliff. Cliff, thank you very much indeed. It begins unpromisingly. Hiya, Simon, Matt, Nigel and Susan. and it came in last week.
right.
Cliff's paying attention.
Yeah.
This dates back to 1963. I was in my second year at Toxteth High School in Liverpool. So we're naming it because it's a long time ago.
Okay.
Every year we put on a Christmas carol service. It's a festive one. At the prestigious Philharmonic Hall in Liverpool. For reasons unbeknown to me, I was selected in this year to be included in the choir, even though I couldn't sing. As in all grammar schools back in the day, we had to wear a uniform, and the adherence to such was inflexible. Therefore, to avoid loss, either unintentional or by force, i.e. theft, most of us had a name tag sewn into each item of clothing. This is very important. On the day of the concert, we had a rehearsal in the early afternoon. Mr. Rowlands, our music teacher, was quite an accomplished piano player, it has to be said, and obviously relished his position as music teacher in our then prestigious school. He would approach his piano with all the pomp and ceremony of a true virtuoso, stand in front of the piano, look at his assembled choir, glorying in his position, flick the tails of his suit over his stool, and sit with a great flourish, befitting his importance. He would then lift the lid on his upright piano, and with great aplomb play the first chord of the first carol to be sung. The chord was always pitch perfect, and his obvious pleasure with the sound was there for all to see. After the rehearsal, we were dismissed to have lunch and reassemble at the pre-designated time for our concert proper. The rehearsal had passed off without error, as we'd been practicing for weeks, and we were well drilled and all expecting a faultless performance. I don't know what got into me that day, because I was a model child, but I nipped back into the concert hall and deposited my scarf into the upper lid of Mr. Rowland's upright piano, not giving a thought to the consequences. Concert time, and we, the choir, were all assembled. Mr. Rowland comes on stage. He walks to the centre, faces the audience, packed with all the teachers, parents of the choir, parents of the non-choristers, school governors, mayors, and so on. There was not an empty seat in the house. Mr. Rowlands was puffed up and ready to go through his, by now familiar to us, routine. He theatrically bowed to his expectant audience, pirouetted 180 degrees, paused in front of the piano, theatrically flicked out his tails, sat with all the deference he assumed was his due, lifted the lid and played the first chord of the first carol. Plonk. Well, that wasn't a C major. He persisted. Plonk. No, still not a C major, nor any other chord known to man or beast. Not flustered in the least, the dapper Mr. Rowland stood up, lifted the lid of the piano, retrieved the offending article that had caused this new chord to be produced, and placed it on the floor next to his stool. He and the audience were only too aware of the giggling and amusement within the choir. And it was only at this moment that I realised my name was sewn into my scarf. And it was only at this moment I knew I would be severely punished for my crime. Corporal punishment was liberally used in schools back then, and I knew I was going to get the cane the next day. My fear was palpable. I could not sing. All that was on my mind was the pain to come in the morning. The sweat was running down my back in rivers. I was sweating more than a Royal Marine on a spelling test.
Okay. I mean, really?
I barely slept all night. I knew only too well my impending fate, and I could think of nothing to avoid it. Nothing. I even thought of running away from home, but knowing that was not practical, dismissed it, and I was done for. I was terrified, Father Simon. So it's assembly. The whole school is mustered in the assembly hall. The headmaster comes to the fore. Philip Hawksett, he bawls. Get up here this instant. I'm puzzled. What has Hawksett done that's worse than me? As Hawksett reached the stage, the headmaster produced the offending scarf from behind his back. Oh, bother and gosh, I thought, as we said in 1964, but I was still puzzled why he'd been called up. I hadn't told anyone what I'd done. I'd made sure no one had seen me. Hawksett and me didn't look alike, not even close. Why? Hawksett, the head began, if in your future life you choose to embark on a life of crime, try and not leave a signed confession of your crime at the scene. Everyone was puzzled, including me. The headmaster handed Hawksett the scarf and asked him to read out loud the name stitched so beautifully inside. P. Hawksett, he said. How has this happened? I thought. Dilemma time. Do I own up and take the lashes, or leave Hawkeye to his fate and comfort him as best I can? To my eternal shame, I kept quiet. I have felt the utmost guilt ever since, but on the upside, I didn't get 6 of the best, and I wasn't shamed in front of the whole school. On the downside, well, I know I'm going to get slated on your show. This is the first time I've recounted this tale to anyone, as I've been too ashamed to say. I also have to say that many years later, I met up with P. Hawksett, Hawkeye as we called him. We hadn't seen each other for 35 years. I admitted to him what I had done. To my horror, he said, I knew it was you, Cliff. I said, how do you know? He said, because I liked your scarf better than mine, and I burnt a hole in mine, smoking. Number 6. So I swapped it with yours. I couldn't say anything because that would have meant me admitting to theft. So I decided to take my lumps. Karma is what I call it. Anyway, I was relieved, but still racked with guilt. I'm only seeking forgiveness from Hawkeye, as I know I don't deserve nor expect forgiveness from anyone else. Love your show, by the way.
Good,
says Cliff, as though that's going to carry any favour at all with Sister Holly.
Well, Christmas carol concerts are a big deal. They're a big event in the music calendar, really, for schools. And why you put your scarf inside the piano, I don't really understand
behaviour.
Why you did that.
I don't think he does either.
That was all. It was never going to end well, really. I like the fact that the music teacher was called Mr. Rowlands, and there's literally Roland pianos. Yeah, but I just thought that was very, like Roland keyboards.
Yeah.
So I thought that was great. But no, even with that though, I just feel really sorry for Philip in all this, who managed to get the cane because of your scarf. It was very complicated at the end, but I still am not forgiving at all, because why would you put a scarf in a piano? That's just
piano.
disrespectful to a piano.
Also, he'd stolen the scarf.
Stolen scarf.
He burnt his own one with his
Yeah.
fag.
Well, is that not the root of this confession? Is the karma that came back onto your man Hawkeye? Because he'd stolen the scarf. Let's not forget that. He'd stolen the scarf and smoked and burnt a hole in it. And that's why Cliff ended up with the different scarf. And so, the karma came round. And also, I would make the point, isn't it, Mr. Rowlands, aren't you supposed to check your piano? You're supposed to check your
No,
equipment
you don't.
before you go out
does
there.
that?
You say, are all the keys there? Yes, they are. All black and white. Good. And are there any scarves?
Inside?
Are there any scarves inside? No, there aren't. Everything's fine. So it was all Mr. Rowland's fault. Definitely forgiven.
Okay, people's verdict, please. Do you forgive Cliff? Yes or no? 61054 on the text. First word is silent. Just before the news, we heard a tale from Cliff from the early 1960s. Toxteth High School, pianos, scarves, the cane and smoking and various other outdated ideas and concepts. Here's the people's verdict. What do we reckon?
So Tommy says, can't forgive this one. Can't believe he ruined the concert with his scarf. Also, Holly's right. Roland are a brand of keyboard and synth makers. Ray says, from someone who might have sellotaped all the piano keys together at school assembly, I have to forgive. And Jenny in London says, as a piano teacher myself, students are always dropping all kinds of things inside the pianos. Pencils, paper, pens. I even found an old marathon bar in one a couple of weeks ago. The act of putting the scarf inside the piano really was an act of sabotage for the concert, as it's never going to sound good with that inside it. I feel sorry for the music teacher. No forgiveness here.
Marathon, that's a Snickers.
Yes,
bar, just explaining for the
Holly,
for the youngsters. Your confession would be welcome. If we read it on air, you get a smart speaker, plus you're in the podcast. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can pick it up at the podcast shop. You can review us, and that's a very fine thing. Send your confession, please, to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Today's confession, here we go. Let's play the music. There we go. A little bit of Al Benoni here. Comes from Davy Dave, also called David. Father Simon in the Venerable Forum of Forgiveness. I've wanted to confess to a minor misdemeanor, we'll be the judge of that, for many years, but for reasons that will become obvious shortly, I felt I might not get a fair hearing with your previous employers.
Oh, right, yeah.
To start with, I was thinking he meant Worthing Borough Council, but I realised that he's moved on a bit from that. It's the spring of 1987, and I was in my final year at a well-known university in the southwest of England. I was studying the beautiful and occasionally useful, says, before Matt asks, I was studying the beautiful and occasionally useful science of mathematics. My girlfriend at the time was, however, studying sociology in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. Pause for Matt to pass judgment.
No, I heard about far be it from me.
What did you study?
French and Spanish.
There you go.
Yeah.
Not much better.
No.
You're... by which I mean it's a very useful,
all very
useful
yes.
subjects.
Well done.
Your older listeners will remember that in the spring of '87, the country was gripped by general election fever. The overall outcome was by no means certain, and pundits reckoned the result could rest on the voting intentions of a few key marginals, one of which was our city. A well-known broadcaster decided to run a special edition of their well-known current affairs programme featuring 4 of these marginals. As part of the research for the programme, they needed their own opinion polls taken in the constituencies, and for some reason approached university staff on the sociology course to see if any of the students wanted to earn a small reward for conducting some interviews with the general public. Being a typically poor student, my girlfriend volunteered and was allocated a precise location in town for the survey, which needed 50 responses and had to be done on a specific Wednesday afternoon between 2 and 4. No alterations were possible. Come the appointed time, she trudged off down the hill into town, clipboard, pen and 50 crisp new interview sheets in hand, ready to capture details of the occupations and voting intentions of unsuspecting passers-by. And then the heavens opened. Dramatically. Biblical it was. All afternoon, and it did not stop. She returned a couple of hours after, looking absolutely soaked through, cold, shivering, and utterly rejected. And dejected, in fact. Due to the weather, and that her allocated location was a small shopping precinct on early closing day, different times, ask your parents.
Yeah.
This is when, Holly, you'll be surprised to know shops decided to close early on particular days.
Right.
Often on Wednesdays. When there was no point being anywhere near a shop. The grand total of people she'd managed to persuade to stop and be interviewed in the downpour was 3. Well, Father Simon, what to do? My maths told me that the opinion poll would be useless if there weren't enough responses. And, well, the reward would be nice. And she had tried hard. It wasn't her fault about the weather or the appointed location. And the timing couldn't have been worse. There was only one solution. We were going to have to make the whole thing up. I mean, how hard could it be? And who would ever know? The interview forms were already in a pretty bad state, having been out in the rain for 2 hours, so it wouldn't be obvious that they hadn't gone through the expected wear and tear of a properly conducted survey, and making up the data should be a doddle. So after drying off, warming up and putting the kettle on, we set to work. We invented nurses and lawyers, plumbers, shop workers, secretaries, students, care workers, housewives, pensioners, you name it. The variety of people who'd allegedly been in the shopping precinct that afternoon was quite remarkable. For each one, we made a reasonable guess at their stereotypical voting intentions, then lobbed in a few left-field responses to throw anyone with suspicions off the scent. Finally, having seen a few opinion polls on the telly over the preceding days, we made sure that the overall numbers were close enough to the national polls not to seem unrealistic. Job done, the results were handed in next morning, and we eagerly awaited the TV broadcast on the following Monday evening at 8 o'clock. I wonder what that could be. Sure enough, there it was on the screen. Whilst a few million people were watching, taking in the numbers, the graphs and the detailed analysis, the swingometer, I'll tell you later, and the like, and then thinking what it meant for the future of the country, 2 students in a small room on a remote campus in the West Country knew that at least part of this was a total fabrication. In my defence, our 47 made-up responses probably wouldn't have made too much of a difference to the overall survey numbers, but however, I do seek forgiveness waits for the crescendo from everyone else in the country, just in case we may have played a small part in influencing floating voters and therefore the overall result on polling day. You could see this as an attack on democracy, but maybe not. I lay myself humbly at your feet and await the verdict. Given Sister Holly's recent comment about lying is never the answer, I fear little sympathy in that department. However, given Brother Matt's recent astute observation that without lying this feature doesn't exist,
that is true.
I feel a bit more hopeful in that direction. I mean, most people feel hopeful when it comes to Matt and forgiveness, because it would have to be super bad for it to go the wrong way. But anyway, Davy, you know, this is an important thing. Panoramas. Oh no, could it be any? Could have been any show. It's an important program. This is part of the protected and much revered, much loved democratic process. And Davy Dave and his girlfriend have been up to no good, Sister Holly.
Well, attack on democracy is quite right, really. Falsifying all of these findings and then sending them off to, you know, a very important programme that millions of people watched.
Which you've never heard of.
Which I've never heard of. You know, is really quite bad. You know, that could have affected the way things voted, perhaps, in 1987, and that was all down to you.
What do you remember of the 1987?
I remember it like it was yesterday.
And so therefore?
So therefore, not forgiving at all.
Brother Matthew.
Right, is it just me that they're asking you to do a survey of 50 people in 2 hours? I mean, even if those streets were teeming with people, that's 1 every 2 minutes or just over. And they've asked you to do it on early closing day, on a Wednesday. How unlike that particular political department to be completely out of touch with the real people. So for that reason...
I think we're tiptoeing into privacy.
Bash, bosh. I think I'm going to forgive. Yeah. Forgiven.
Because
of the system.
The system.
And that certain Millbank political unit. Yup. Coming for you, Millbank.
Okay.
In your face.
Very, very specialist and niche. Yeah. Do you forgive Davy Dave, please, on the text 61054. First word is Simon. In the meantime, just before the news, we had a confession from Davy Dave. It was from the 1987 general election. Davy Dave and his girlfriend, a sociology student, were asked to do 50 interviews in a marginal constituency. However, it started to rain so much that there was no one to speak to. And so they added to the 3 they actually got 47 that they made up. A shocking crime against the very fabric of the nation.
Really?
Something like that. Anyway,
Okay.
people's verdict, here it comes.
Jerry says, forgiven. I'm with brother Matt on this one. Why were they given so little time to do it? No, says Drix. Absolutely not forgiven. Do you have any idea how hard it is to complete research surveys? Having worked in market research for many years, I know how false info can skew an outcome. But Sarah in Lewisham says, yes, forgiven. Despite the fact I used to work for a well-known market research company, did it really make any difference on this occasion? Of course it didn't.
Well, we'd like your confession, and if you could send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk, that would be very nice. Thank you very much indeed. The Confessions podcast is available Friday. My confession is, I've never liked that song. Everybody else thinks it's one of the greatest songs of all time, and I've always found it self-indulgent.
Okay.
It's nonsense. But anyway, I am not here. I am not here for this. It's not my confessional. It's your confessional.
Yes.
Send your confessions, please, to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Tonight's comes from Hillwalker. This is a pseudonym, as you're about to find out. Though really, I think Hillwalker could have got away with it.
Oh.
Anyway, Father Simon, Sister Holly, Brother Matt. My confession dates over 40 years ago to the very early 80s, when I was a pupil at an all-boys school in London. The school was at the top of a hill, and every day hundreds of boys would walk up and in the afternoon descend the residential road containing the school's gate. About halfway up the hill lived two girls of my age who were friends, let's call them Sally and Jane, and who were driven every morning down the hill on the way to their school by Sally's mother in the family's green estate car. By the time we were about 16, the girls and I had met at various parties and discos. That was the way people met back in the day, Holly. And so had taken to giving me a smile. And occasionally we would wave at each other. This was very nice. Anyway, this happened as they passed me. And sometimes, if the timing was right, there'd be a wave in the evening as well, as Sally's mum returned with them in the car. These are the little things in school that you get very excited about. In the sixth form, we were allowed to leave the school premises. And on this day, I had been out at lunchtime on my own and was returning along the main road. I was about to reach the corner where I would turn left and begin walking up the hill. But as I approached the corner, Sally's mum's green car passed me from behind, turned left and stopped at the bottom of the hill. Sally's mum ducked down in the driver's seat to look out of the passenger window, smiled at me, pointed at me, and then jabbed her finger twice at the passenger window, pointing into the car. This was fantastic. This was an unexpected bonus. I opened the door, I got in, I reached back over my left shoulder to grab the seatbelt. I was a little bit nervous. I hadn't really much encountered girls' mums before. So I was wittering a bit and I strapped myself in. This is very, very kind, I said. It's not much of a hill, you know, I could walk it, but I'm very grateful. And I was burbling as I snapped the seatbelt in before looking ahead out of the windscreen. However, the car didn't move. And I turned to look at Sally's mum, who was looking at me, and she said, "Who are you?"
Of course. Yeah.
I seemed to lose the power of speech. I replied as the dawning embarrassment took hold. "Who are you?" she repeated. "Well," I said, "I'm pointing at the back. Sally and Jane, we wave at each other. You know, then nice, I think. You don't recognise me from each morning? You just offered me a lift up the hill?" "I was offering a lift to my neighbour," she said, and pointed past me out of the passenger window, and coming along the road, and previously unnoticed by me, was the archetypal old lady. I remember white hair, a shuffling walk, a big coat, and her towing a loaded shopping basket on wheels. I lost all my concentration for a bit, so her name escapes me, but let's call her Mrs. Smith. The passenger window was wound down, possibly by me. Again, I'd lost concentration, so I've got no idea. Sally's mum called out, "Mrs. Smith, would you like a lift up the hill, you know, like normal?" Mrs. Smith shuffled to the window, ducked down and looked in. "Oh, no, that's all right," she said, sounding like Terry Jones.
She does, doesn't she?
From Monty Python again. A 1960s and 70s satirical TV show. "No, that's all right. You've already got someone in there." Father Simon, I know the correct thing to have done would have been to have jumped out of the car, helped Mrs. Smith in, and then emigrated to Australia. However, the sheer social awfulness of the situation, excuse me, left me totally frozen. Mrs. Smith wandered off And I was left there. This can't get any worse, I thought. And so said, well, you might as well give me a lift up the hill.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind, that would be really nice. Number 24. Replied Sally's mum and began driving. The journey was no more than 20 seconds, but seemed to last forever. As we approached her house, I mumbled something about thanks very much, but she carried on past her house and swung into the school's entrance, dropping me right at the gate. Thank you very much, I said, and got out. Anyway, although I still cringe about this, I'm okay, so on to forgiveness. I don't seek forgiveness from Sally's mum for a strange teenager leaping into her car and demanding that she give them a lift. It was an honest mistake, and I really thought that she knew me. After all, we're there every day. A few weeks later, I was walking home from school when Jane, Sally and her mum stopped the car and offered me a lift again. I refused, but they insisted, and when I got in, they all justifiably burst out laughing. No, it's Mrs. Smith, from whom I seek forgiveness. I hope she's still with us, but, let's be honest.
Unlikely.
She was old in the early 80s.
No.
I think it's unlikely. Anyway... But one warm day in the early 1980s, she unnecessarily pulled her shopping basket on wheels all the way up the hill because of a teenager being an idiot. I hope you can forgive me. Yours, thankfully, Hill Walker, who uses a pseudonym when really you think... Nice.
Yeah, very good.
When really you would think it's fine, just call you Brian or John or something. But anyway, still embarrassed about a teenage indiscretion. Maybe it finished off Mrs. Smith, we'll never know. But anyway, Sister Holly... I don't know, you're going to let this one go, surely.
Well, the thing is, I was going to actually forgive you, Hill Walker. When this first started off, there is nothing worse, and we've all been there, where you wave at... Someone waves at you, you wave back, they're waving at someone behind you. Oh, so awkward. And I was cringing, and I thought, oh, that's an honest mistake. But the main problem here is the fact that you didn't get out the car when Mrs. Smith did actually arrive. I thought that was a bit poor.
It's frozen with embarrassment.
I know, but she was a little frail old lady going up a hill. She needed that lift. You didn't need that lift, and that's why I'm not forgiving.
To be honest, Hill Walker, because we know about these things, the old lady was probably like 40. You have absolutely no idea how old this person was. Brother from another gutter.
Well, I'm going to posit the case that maybe Mrs. Smith was able to deal with the hill. She called out to her, do you want a lift? No, I don't. I'm just going to carry on walking. So given that Mrs. Smith didn't want to get in, then he's well within his rights to say, do you mind taking me up to the top of the hill? And I thought this was going to end with the fact that him and they were now married. Not her and the mum, him and the
Mrs.
Sally,
Smith.
That would be wrong. him and the Sally and Jane.
I think that would be like The Graduate.
Well, no. Anyway, so yes, definitely forgiven. Yes, and also, as Holly points out, we've all had the thing where someone waves at you and you wave back, and it turns out it was on behind. So all happened, but to us all before. Who are we to cast the first stone? Definitely forgiven.
Okay, so I'm gonna chance my arm on the people's verdict here because we think we can make this work. Okay, because as we've mentioned a couple of times, things are slightly out of order.
Yeah.
Because of stuff and things being plugged into the wrong place. So, but we think this may well work. Do you think that's fine, Sister
Yes.
Holly? Producer Holly now, obviously changing hats. You can leave the wimple behind. So, do you forgive Hill Walker? Yes or no? On the text 61054. First word is Simon. Hello, good evening. This is Greatest Hits Radio. Food on the way, Foodie Thursday, one of the kitchen's greatest hits. However, just before the news, a confession from Hill Walker, who thought, this is back in his school days, back in the early 80s, thought Sally's mum was offering him a lift to school, but actually, no, she was offering an old neighbour, not him, and the lady next door never ever recovered. That's not necessarily true.
That's not true.
I have just made that up.
Yeah.
Anyway, the people's verdict, here it is.
Forgiven, says Mitch. Ultimately, Sally's mum did offer the old lady a lift, and she said no, so I'm sure Mrs. Smith can look after herself. Totally forgiven.
He was probably 36.
Yes,
anyway.
totally forgiven, says Ian. Completely sympathise with the frozen embarrassment. It's good for elderly people to keep active anyway. And Judy says, forgiven, but I was hoping for a more graduate scenario.
Well, that was what you suggested quite ridiculously at the end, and inappropriately so.
Yeah, I thought so.
So if you have a confession, please send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk.